Okay, so we're here on our first lecture for American minorities. We're going to start by doing kind of a review of the three big theories from sociology from intro that I want you to be able to carry with you over to our class for sure. You get to read about them in section 8.1 of Minority Studies, but I want to take a quick section here and let's do a quick review. So the three paradigms are functionalism, or what we call rational choice theory. It says that basically everybody makes decisions to increase their pleasure, decrease their pain, and that we can depend on this rational choice being made by people, and that society is basically stable, and that's what society favors, is a stable relation. This favoring of stability basically says society works for everyone, it occasionally gets out of balance, and then the system fixes itself. Paradigm 2, or theory 2, is conflict theory. And this says, no, we're not held together by just everybody naturally getting along, that in fact, actually, it's the exercise of power by one group over another, usually a group that controls a resource in that society, about how that society goes about making itself, farming, fishing, industrialization, whatever it is. The third theory, called symbolic interactionism, favors a different view. It's not trying to answer big questions. It says that we do things based as social creatures on the meanings that we assign to them. So you want to be a certain career, usually not because it makes the absolute most money, but because it has meaning for you. You do things based on meaning and symbol in your life. So make sure that you review those. That's 8.1 from Minority Studies. But we also need to, if you will, accept some things to go on with our course, just to accept these as sort of beginning assumptions. One is that we are social beings. We're not programmed at birth by nature, that it's not our parents. They play a part, but it's not a complete programming. It's not religion. It's not any other of the social institutions, but the conglomeration of those institutions that make us who we are, and that we are social beings. Another thing that we need to accept is that we form groups as humans, and that formation of groups is important. It's important to understand our behavior, how we go about doing what we do, is that we form these groups. Number 3, that the groups matter. What group you join, what group you're assigned to matters. Matters to you, and it matters to society. Recurring themes throughout all of sociology is nature versus nurture. Remember, in sociology, we tend to focus on nurture, which is what society and people bring us up to being, versus, let's say, tiger cubs or cobra cubs that are born with a great deal of instinct. We're not. Nature doesn't program us very much. Not to say nature doesn't play anything, but we tend to believe that it's a smaller percentage than nurture. Us versus them, or in-group versus out-group. This is going to be crucial for understanding race and ethnic and other groups like aging and disability and poverty. By defining who's in that group and who your out-group is crucial, because forming that us identity, the in-group, puts another group out, and that puts us into an immediate set of odds. Next, we need to accept that there's power in society, and that power matters. When we come into a society, a social identity is basically stapled to us. Whether it's race or gender or class, we're given this. We usually don't get much of a choice in it. It is given to us. The traditional way that we're teaching courses like this is usually talking about just racial and ethnic groups. But we're taking a broader view here in American minorities to include groups like the disabled, gender groups, age groups, as well as minority, racial, and ethnic groups. And the connective tissue there is power. One group has the power to define and basically set up the social rewards or barriers that a group faces. For instance, the rich. The rich are a small group, but we're not going to study them because they have power and resources. Simple fact is there are 3 billionaires in the United States that have the same wealth as half the nation. 165 million people have the same wealth as just 3 people. And that power dynamic is what is at the basis of a great deal of conflicts in our society. The ability to define what's okay, that's okay, and that our system makes that okay. And who gets to make those decisions about what a group is, who's in that group, who's not in that group. We have to accept that racial and ethnic identities matter, that identity that's given to you matters, and always not in a good way. And that there's a reason. So the fact that racial identities, ethnic identities matter, we have to sort of sit back and go, well, why? Well, it's either biology, as in, just like the fastest cheetah gets to have more baby cheetahs, maybe it's biology that puts one racial group on top of another. There's a different way of looking at that, saying, it's tradition. Well, we've always done it this way. This group has always been on top. And both of those two have been brought up an awful lot, particularly here in America, to explain racial and ethnic relationships here in the United States. But when we really look at it, particularly history, what we find is power. One group gets to define who's in power and who's not, who's on top, who's not. And by putting itself on top and maintaining that, making the education system, the government system, the religious system, all these other institutions in our society constantly saying that disabled people don't matter, women don't matter, the old don't matter, as well as ethnic groups that are considered to be less than, creates this power dynamic. And history shows us that it is power. We tend to look at groups like here in the United States, particularly a group like, let's say, Asian Americans, that are only about 4.5% of our population. And we look at them, as a minority group. But at one point, Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire ruled from China all the way to Europe. They were the top group, not Europeans, not white people. So clearly, history shows us that a group in power gets to make that decision, and then they continue to make that decision, and it benefits one group, and it tends to not benefit another group. When we take a look at a concept like race, which came from our friends in anthropology, when they were thinking, now this is over 100 years ago, they thought that there were real differences between human beings, that Asian folks, black folks, and European folks were different kinds of human beings, and that one was superior. They went to extraordinary steps to prove that white folks were somehow superior in genes. They didn't really have DNA ideas yet, but genes, that the nature of this would be that white people were superior. And again, they go to forming whole schools of thought called eugenics to continue to make white people on top and use this concept of race. Now, our secret word for the lecture today is Vladimir Lenin. That's right, our secret word is Vladimir Lenin for this first lecture. Now, when we look at race and we find that it's a flawed concept, then we turn to another terminology, ethnicity, which is culturally based, which actually makes more sense because it's the culture that you're raised in that tends to give you your ideas of who you are, how society works, not some racial programming that suddenly kicks in and makes you one way or the other. Now, from chapter 1 in Our Lives, obviously, read that chapter. All the words that are in bold print are important. Paying particular attention to ascribed and achieved status. That's from Introduction to Sociology. Dominant and subordinate group. Double consciousness, particularly as it's applied to African Americans, W.E.B. Du Bois. Ethnocentrism, the belief that your group is superior, is going to be sort of a thread constantly woven throughout this course. Genocide, the idea of intersectionality, that things like gender and race and class and other things, labels, institutional interactions with individuals, help to form our identity, make it so that you can or can't interact in society the same ways as other people. The concept of segregation, keeping groups apart, where we live and where we're told to live matters. Also the idea of systematic racism. Again, this is going to be something that is recurrent over and over. The idea is that not that everybody that is white in America is secretly members of the Klan trying to do this, but if institutions were developed with racial ideals at their very genesis, at the very beginning, and brought forward, that they often still have systematic racial ideas and preferences to this very day, and that is something that we need to examine. Now, I want to talk about A People's History by Howard Zinn. This is where we get a dramatically different view of Christopher Columbus than we had in school. We get a view where he talks about the Arawak people being fine servants, that they were docile, and that they would be great, basically, to overcome and make subordinate. And that they treated them completely inhumanely. His own story talks about killing 2 Arawak Indians that just didn't want to trade with him, so they just ran him through. He basically lied to Spain, saying, oh, wow, I've discovered Asia and China, when in fact he discovered Cuba and modern-day Haiti and the Dominican Republic, what we call Hispaniola. He said, oh, wait a minute, there are as many slaves as you want here. And on his second voyage, he brings 500 slaves back with him, many of which die. Those that he left, the Spaniards that he left in charge, created this inhumane system where the ladies had to bring them gold, and if you didn't bring enough gold, they would chop your hands off, allowing you to bleed to death. The Spaniards would ride the Indians like they were horses. And this isn't just Columbus. We find Cortez destroying the Aztecs, Pizarro destroying the Incas. These were genocides, and they were looking for gold and slaves. But that's not giving a break to Northern Europeans. In Jamestown, the Europeans kill women and kids in raids. They commit a genocide against the Indians because they weren't making good slaves, because they could run away. The Bible and religion being used both by Catholic priests and Protestants to say that there's an excuse for this kind of behavior. That, for instance, Cotton Mather, famous Protestant preacher, talks about the 600 dead Pequots as being unnecessary and being something that needed to happen, and that there was an excuse, that we had this religious green light to commit these kinds of genocides. The second article is about how Christopher Columbus is portrayed in a comparison way with the sort of whitewashing of Christopher Columbus in your history books and even in encyclopedias. Maybe you can remember how Christopher Columbus was remembered. And the thing that I want us to continue to come back to is that there's power in that story. There's power in being able to tell the story of, hey, this white guy discovered America, where there were already millions of people living in America that he discovered. The same way that a thief doesn't discover your house when they invade it, but by telling the story that way, it made Columbus a hero. Indians basically being this side note to history. Oh, it's a shame about them, but it had to happen. It didn't. And we're going to be coming and returning to those ideas over and over.